into the man's throat without his permission. Was this action immoral? This big ethical question arises out of the conflict between two ideals that, taken separately, both seem correct. 1. Doctors should do what is best for their patients, and 2. Patients have the right to control what happens to their own bodies. Resolving such a dilemma involves prioritizing, deciding which ideal is more important in a given situation. Here we find ourselves in the realm of bioethics, the area of philosophy that includes ethical analysis of medical decisions. Principalism, a well-known bioethical approach, reduces ethical behavior to the following rules: don't harm anyone, help people, let people make their own decisions, and be fair. Bioethicists often refer to these rules as the principles of non-maleficence, beneficence, autonomy, and justice. Many of the best "I can't believe he did that" moments on the show occur when House gleefully flouts these principles. Non-maleficence, the oldest of the principles, is often attributed to the ancient medical precept of primum non nocere, or first do no harm. This principle can be interpreted strictly or modestly. Play it safe, harm only when clearly medically necessary. A doctor who was committed to never causing harm would not, for example, amputate a limb infected with flesh-eating bacteria, while a doctor who adopted the modest approach would see the harm of amputation as justified. House planned to harvest a spinal nerve from his CIPA patient who couldn't feel pain, a procedure that was not diagnostically necessary and might cause paralysis, violates both interpretations of this principle. CIPA is an acronym for congenital insensitivity to pain with anhidrosis, where non-maleficence requires people simply to avoid harm, beneficence requires people to take action and help. House tends to abide by the principle of beneficence, but the clinic patient with a cockroach in his ear might have hoped for a more prompt application of this principle. To avoid clinic mentioned him. As I said, after the Syracusans had made him leader of their army, he realized at once that those mercenary troops were useless, for they were condottieri of the same stamp as our Italian ones. And since he considered that he could not continue to employ them or disband them, he had them all cut to pieces. Thereafter he made war with his own troops and not foreign ones. I want also to recall a relevant example from the Old Testament. When David offered to Saul to go and fight Goliath, the Philistine champion, Saul gave him his own weapons and armor in order to imbue him with courage. But after David had put them on, he rejected them, saying that he could not fight well with them, and he therefore wanted to confront the enemy with his own sling and knife. In short, weapons and armor belonging to others fall off you or weigh you down or constrict your movements. After Charles VII had liberated France from the English, through a combination of good luck and prowess, he recognized the need for France to be defended by national troops, and formed in his kingdom an army composed of cavalry and infantry. His son Louis later disbanded the infantry and began to employ Swiss soldiers. This blunder, being followed by the others, led to the present dangerous position of that kingdom. By strengthening the position of the Swiss, he demoralized the rest of his army, for he disbanded the infantry and made his own cavalry dependent on foreign soldiers. Since they are used to fighting together with the Swiss, they are not confident of being able to win battles without them. The outcome is that the French are inferior to the Swiss, and without the Swiss, they make a poor showing against enemies. The French armies then have been of a mixed character, partly mercenary and partly national. Such a combination is much better than an army of auxiliaries or an army of mercenaries, but much inferior to native troops. And let this example suffice, for the kingdom of France would be unconquerable if the military system set up by Charles had been developed or at least preserved. But men have so little judgment and to teachers who are outed, how they deal with homophobic parents or governors, or whether queer is an acceptable form of pupil to pupil abuse in the school. Too frequently, gay and lesbian adults talk about the homophobic treatment they received at school, which was either not taken seriously or ignored by staff. It is very salutary that so many of them felt isolated and thought there was no teacher they could confide in. In one study of lesbian and gay teachers, 19% had contemplated suicide. Policies that deal with these issues can be helpful, especially if they have been produced by a large group of stakeholders. But just as critical is the example set by the head. The significance of signals picked up from observing others was mentioned by several of the heads interviewed in Chapter 3, who emphasized the importance of modeling. Key messages are picked up in this way. Sexual harassment is unwanted, unwelcome, and unsolicited behavior, usually of a sexual nature or with sexual overtones, towards people in less powerful positions or circumstances. In school, it can take place between adults and children, and it is about the power of one person over another. Power in this sense does not necessarily mean formal status, so it is possible for a teacher to sexually harass his head of department and force students to harass their teacher. Sexual harassment is about trying to put someone else down, making them feel small, intimidated, and powerless. The men and women can both be guilty of harassment. The vast majority of reported cases are males to females. This is not surprisingly when in the rest of society, power is generally seen to rest with men. In schools, it is not unknown for women teachers to be subjected to sexual harassment from male pupils. As both Wakadin and Rie had demonstrated, young children can be very sexually aware, and harassment is not confined to secondary schools. Describing boys' resistance in a nursery school, Wakadin describes two 4-year-old boys talking to their teacher. By money, we have already seen that the main disadvantage of a barter economy is that needs must always coincide. Another is that rates of exchange between commodities cannot easily be worked out. It is extremely difficult to do this, except in terms of some standard measure, for precisely the same reasons that it would be very difficult to compare the heights of Westminster Abbey and St. Paul's Cathedral if there were no unit of linear measurement. One would have to resort to some standard of measurement, such as the length of string or a piece of wood. Since one would have to use a standard each time one measured the length or height of any object, it is only sensible that one particular standard should be accepted as the standard. Money is the standard of measuring value, just as the yard or meter is the standard for measuring length. We have already defined money, which is acting as a standard measure of value, as a numeraire. This is a disembodied money, money with no function other than that of measuring value. It was for this purpose alone that we used money in our analysis in Part 1. On reflection, it will be clear that if a particular commodity is used as a unit of account, it will be convenient for it to serve also as the commodity through which exchange is carried out. This leads us to the second function of money. It acts as a medium of exchange. This is the central function of money. And it is performing this function that the notion of general acceptability is most clearly brought out. A good will not act as a convenient medium of exchange unless it is accepted by everyone. But it is important that just because this is the most obvious function of money, it should not be thought of as the only function of money. The other functions are also important. Third, money functions are as a store of value. The good chosen as money is always something which can be kept for long periods without deterioration or wastage. It is a form in which wealth can be kept intact for 1 year to the next. Money is a bridge from the present to the future. It is therefore essential that the money commodity should always be one which can be easily and safely stored. This explains the popularity of gold in the past. It does not suffer from physical deterioration. It also explains the present popularity of bank deposits, for they are perfectly safe unless the bank's ledgers and or its computer data are destroyed or stolen, both unlikely contingencies.